Cool. Hello. So we are back and we're going to cover more things penalty related. As always, please ask any questions about any of the things that we're going to cover today or any of the stuff that came up at y'all had a scrimmage. Was it yesterday or like a practice in-person practice yesterday? So yeah, please, as always, ask any and all the questions. This round, we're going to cover the remaining penalties, which are other illegal contact, multiplayers, illegal positioning, gaining position, interfering with the flow of the game, other illegal procedures, and penalties around unsporting conduct. So last week we covered some information needed to make the call for metrics, for seeing the action. You may have gathered some information around this, putting it into implementing it at yesterday's practice. But here is also a guide, a WFTDA officiating cues, codes, and hand signals doc. I'll share it in the chat here. We're not going to read through this, but just so you have it as a resource, there's the link to that covers a lot of good information to just think through and especially add in combined to what we're chatting about today. Back to this chart. So last session, we spoke about back blocks, high blocks, low blocks, head blocks, forearms, and leg blocks. And I realized after watching the recordings and things, I might have skipped over what the metrics for each penalty actually was, like what is a back block. We kind of talked around it and we showed examples of it, but we didn't really define, I don't think, exactly what each of those things were. So please, again, if you have any questions around any of it, please ask. But just real quick, back block, center of the back, basically between shoulder blades, all the way down. That does include the person's butt. High blocks, anything collarbone or up. Low blocks, anything mid-thigh or down. Head block, using anything from collarbone up. Forearms, anything from your elbow to your fingertips. And leg block, using your mid-thigh or below. So try to make sure to actually cover the specifics of that for the rest of these. But like I said before, we're going to cover everything else that's on this list today. So remaining contact penalties are your illegal contact, direction, and multiplayer. Illegal contact is contact while in a position that is outside of where contact is legal. So that's out of play blocks, early hits, out of bounds blocks, when you're in a place that you're not supposed to be having contact and you're making contact. Direction, you are making contact that has impact while not going derby direction. So anything less than lateral movement clockwise is a direction penalty. Multiplayers, creating a link or impenetrable wall that causes impact when challenged. The only reason those players were able to stay together and keep the opposing blocker or opposing player blocked was because of the link. So that's kind of the basic, like, boiled down versions of them. We'll dive deeper into each of them. One note about how it's written in the rules. I do want to note that straddling is different than fully inbounds. You can block somebody who is straddling. You can't block somebody who is out of bounds. You can be contacted. You can be hit while you are straddling, but you cannot contact others while you are straddling. So just to differentiate what straddling means and what you can and can't do and what you can and can't do to someone who is straddling. And then you'll see assists, initiation of assists on that bottom portion of the right block of text. That's things like whips, like whipping a teammate or pulling yourself through a space by holding on to a teammate, or even just pushing a teammate. You'll see a lot of the times a blocker, as their teammate is going by, they'll just push them forward. All of those things are what we're talking about when you see the word assist in the rules. So we'll jump straight into it. First one, direction penalty. We're going to go through some examples like we did last time with some GIFs or GIFs, whatever camp you're in for that. So again, direction contact with impact while not going derby direction. Here we have a black blocker in front of the white tripod. They stop and play offense for the black jammer. Contact from a stop position, potentially also moving opposite derby direction. It's a little tough to tell from this angle. And the impact was the black jammer was able to pass those opposing blockers because of the black blocker's illegal contact. So are you able to see? Yeah, you can kind of see my mouse on here. So it's this, what is the number? 8K7. I don't know how old this is if they have letters in there. But this black blocker mostly up front. You can see they are stopped, and then they push this player out of the way, which allows their jammer to get past that person. So even, this is another example we chatted a little bit last time around. The impact here wasn't necessarily that the blocker who was making the hit gained anything from it, but their teammate gained something from it. So you can see they push that white blocker, looks like the wrong direction, and their jammer is able to get by. Another example, white blocker is up on their toe stops and makes contact to a black jammer. Again, this could, depending on what it looked like on the ground, it's always tough to tell from different angles of video. They either stopped or stepping opposite derby direction in the turn, or both. I do want to note, being on toe stops while playing and blocking is not always illegal, but it can be an important thing to consider, or it could be an indicator of illegal direction. So things like sliding on your toe stops, if somebody is driving an opposing player and that player is on their toe stops, but they're sliding, they're still allowing movement to happen. Being on your toe stops by itself is not enough to have a metric for anything. But when you see somebody pop up on their toe stops, you're like, all right, if they start taking steps or if they're not moving, it's just a clue to kind of cue in on what's going on while they're on their toe stops. Is that clear for everybody here? So this white blocker up on their toe stops makes that hit, person goes out and down. Cool. So here we see green 999 drives white 343, the jammer with the helmet cover off, out of bounds towards the inside. The gem ref is in line to tell if that movement was lateral or if it was moving opposite derby direction. So solid positioning on our gem ref here. Could kind of anticipate that that might be coming and got right in line with it so that they could tell whether that was exactly lateral with the inside line or not. So thinking about direction penalties and what to take into consideration. So it's based on the inside line. The movement needs to be having in derby direction based on the inside line. That's especially important on the turns because I think we might have spoken a little bit about this last time, but if you are moving laterally on, say, the pivot line, but you take that same exact action and move it further into the turn and move that same direction, you're going to be actually moving backwards based on the inside line just because of how curves work. So make sure you're always basing it on the inside line. Use the hash marks to help gauge the direction if the contact is further away from the actual line. Or sometimes you can even use landmarks. If you can see a thing past one of the skaters, maybe it's a thing in a venue or other players, just a direct contact between you and another thing, that can also help you gauge whether that person is moving laterally or not laterally. So yeah, we got right here, this blocker who does the run back pushes this jammer out of bounds towards the inside line. And then you can see the jam ref right over here makes a call. Those are all the examples I had for direction calls. Any questions on any of the examples that were shown or anything that came up at scrimmage or anything at all related to direction penalties?
I have a question. You can still obviously get a stop block even if you're not on your toe stops, is that correct? Like if your skates are like hard parallel and you're not moving at all, that would also be considered a stop block, correct?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay.
The toe stop section was more about it's more likely to happen that there's less movement just because you're not on wheels. Even the slightest movement on a wheel is enough to not be considered a stop block. But if you're posted on toe stops, it's much more difficult to continue motion. But yes, either way can totally be true, especially if somebody is like facing laterally, where their wheels are not parallel, but whatever the other word is, I can't think of right now. Opposite the track line. You see it a lot if a jammer is pushing on somebody who is completely sideways and they're just not moving at all because their wheels are not pointing derby direction at all and they're just locked into position there. Which also kind of brings up stop block, which falls within the direction family. Good note there. There is not only making contact while stopped, there's also maintained stop block. So that is if someone is contacting you, adding pressure, trying to push, and you are not allowing them because you are in a stopped position. It's not only loss of position, it's also the loss of trajectory and speed, like we talked about last time with the metrics. So if you are seeing that someone is pushing and that other person who is completely stopped had enough time to adjust and start moving, but they're not, they're staying completely still, and you're able to confirm that there is pressure being applied, that is a maintained stop block. It falls within the direction category.
I just want to make a quick note, especially for those skaters or those officials that skate at Avery Point. That floor is soft. It's softer. So that is, some skaters will use that to their advantage because they have more grip into the floor, like some bigger skaters, some bigger blockers. So just keep an eye out for that, just because I feel like depending on the floor and like how soft that floor could be would make it more difficult either for them to move and easier to sink, causing a stop block. That's my thoughts on that, at least.
Yeah, totally. Floor comes into play a whole bunch when it comes to sliding. Same with your toe stops too. Cool. We'll keep going, but if anybody has anything come up around direction stuff, feel free to ask at any point. All right, we'll go into illegal contact, which once again is contact while you are in a position that is outside of where contact is legal. So you're out of play, there's no pack, early hit, you're making contact before the jam has actually started, or late hit, you're making contact after the jam was over, or you're out of bounds and you're blocking. Anytime you're making contact or having impact in a place or during a time where there isn't supposed to be contact happening. So in this example, the foremost black blocker continues blocking while that white jammer, freight train, is out of play. You can see that front IPR with the 4-7 on the back gives the out of play signal, and that black blocker does not let up. They keep blocking. They don't try to reform at all. So then you can see that same front IPR issues the illegal contact out of play block. It is important to note here that out of play contact doesn't have to have a warning. We'll get more into it when we get into the illegal positioning sort of penalties, but you do need to give a warning to let them know that they need to return before you can penalize them for not returning. You don't necessarily need to warn them for making contact while out of play, because the idea and the rule is that skaters should be aware enough that they are more than 20 feet away from anybody else and continuing to have contact. Oh, is that it? All I had for illegal contact? Yeah, it must have been. All right, so any illegal contact penalty questions? Again, out of play blocks, out of bounds blocks, illegal assists, early hits, late hits. Anything that under the C category anybody had questions about? One thing, okay, let's see, share. One thing that confuses me is the penalty hierarchy is actually late early hits. It's under illegal contact, which is ranked below target and contact zones. So if someone makes a late hit back block, it seems weird to call it as a back block instead. Am I missing something there? So the reason that it would most likely be called a back block, again, just make the call. Neither call is necessarily a wrong call. if they did both things. I believe the reasoning that back block is called in that scenario is because contact to the back is a bigger risk than a late hit. Late hit can just be like you made somebody lose their trajectory, you knocked them out of bounds. That isn't always worse or a higher safety concern than hitting somebody directly in the back. Illegal contact would also fall under if a player fails to yield during a false start. That is an illegal procedure. They don't necessarily need to make contact for that one. We'll get into that one too. Yep, okay. So moving into game structure penalties, we have illegal position. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't do the hand signals for the other ones. Let's go back. All right, so illegal contact is you making a little plate with your hand and you're chopping down. I tend to remember this because it's the same kind of motion as out of play, but out of play is just positioning. Illegal contact is positioning and also they made contact. So I remember it because there's contact in the hand signal. Direction, you are petting the dog, you are turning the steering wheel, you are not flapping, it smells in here, you're not really frantic, you're just really nice, flipping the pancake motion. And then multiplayer, you're holding on to both of your fingertips together. All right, let's go back to where we were. Game structure penalties. So illegal positioning, like I said before, it is just you're not in the right area. Cut, you're literally making an X with your body. That one's pretty straightforward to remember. Interference, you're swiping down your arm, starting from the shoulder, going to your fingertips. And illegal procedure, you're making around the world with your hands. Traveling in basketball, I think, is the same hand signal if you're into basketball. Those are the hand signals. So illegal positioning is not returning to legal play areas or disrupting pack definition by illegal means or adopting illegal positions on your own accord or cutting distance to the penalty box while in bounds. We can definitely dive further into any of those if anybody has questions once we get to that family. Cuts are gaining position on those with superior position by using the space outside of the track boundaries and legal play area. So you're out of bounds and you use that out of bounds area to come in front of somebody who had superior position. If anybody has question on what superior position is, please ask. We can definitely talk through it. Interference, you are interfering with the flow of the game. Things like not fielding any skaters when a jam is supposed to start, calling a timeout when you don't have any left, bench management disrupting a game, fielding a skater who is supposed to be out for 3 jams because of a injury, clock stoppage, those sort of things. And then illegal procedures are illegal actions that basically just don't fall into any of the other categories. They're things like leaving the penalty box early, star pass violations or interference, equipment violations, uniform violations, just kind of those other things that don't fall nicely into any of the other categories. So we'll start with illegal positioning. This again there are certain areas that derby isn't supposed to happen when you're out of play, when you're out of the engagement zone, when you're out of bounds. You need to consider, could the person in the incorrect area be there due to confusion or miscommunication from officials? If so, then it might not be penalizable. So if you give somebody an instruction that is incorrect, or you might think that they misunderstood your verbal cue for some reason, one thing that comes to mind is if you give somebody a false start warning and they leave to go to the penalty box, I wouldn't penalize them for skating out of bounds because they thought they were doing what was needed. They thought they were supposed to report, even though they weren't. So don't penalize it when it just could have been a miscommunication. To get deeper into what I mentioned before around warnings, so some penalties have warnings, like out of play. The warning is required for failure to return, but that can also then turn into illegal contact without the warning, and that's the picture that we saw earlier. False starts, that turns into a failure to yield if they don't yield. The warning is required for that one. No pack, you do need a warning for illegal contact calls. You don't need the warning for destruction because you're not going to give the warning until after it was already destroyed. Once they already destroyed the pack, they already earned that penalty. Priority goes to reforming the pack, and then the penalty gets called. We'll get further into that one once we get into the pack discussion, which is the next session, but I see a big frequent sort of confusion around, what do you mean? I did reform. Why are you giving me a penalty? It's just the order of operations. Person destroyed the pack. You call the no pack, try to get the pack back together. The pack is reformed, and then you issue that destruction because the higher priority goes to reforming the pack because you can't play Derby without a pack. So that one can get confusing for people a little bit when they don't understand what they did because they already did it a little while ago. It's from before. Illegal contact versus illegal position. So I kind of already went over this. The hand motions are very similar. There's a chop versus a chop that lands. Illegal position versus illegal contact. For illegal position, they went or remained somewhere that is not part of legal play. So they went out of play and then they didn't reform after that, or the pack was destroyed and they didn't make an effort to reform it. And it had impact to the function of the game. Again, you can't have a game without pack, so not reforming it when you're supposed to has impact on the game. And then for legal contact, they made contact against an opponent or while helping a teammate while positioned illegally, or during times where contact is not permitted. Again, that is the chop. There was contact made where you weren't supposed to be or when you weren't supposed to be. Any questions around the differences between illegal position, illegal contact? We'll dive a little bit further into examples of illegal positioning, but I wanted to just pause here first to see. If not, cool. So illegal positioning, in this example, black blocker tripod goes out of play in the back. The black pivot ends up moving first, but it was determined that the brace had sufficient time to hear the warning and react. The brace being that foremost person in the tripod who is facing inverted. They were the most responsible for reforming because they were the closest one to the rest of everybody else. So even though the pivot did move, it was more so the responsibility of that brace, and they didn't. They continued playing Derby even after the warning was given, and it was determined that they did have sufficient time to hear the warning, interpret the warning, and take action. They just didn't. It could have potentially also been an illegal contact penalty if it was determined that there was a clear initiator that had more impact in continuing to engage. But the white jammer also continued to contact, and it wasn't realistic that they had enough time to change what they were doing. So if you're not 100% sure if it was illegal contact, there was still that brace didn't move up sufficiently. And that is everything that I had for illegal positioning. Any questions on illegal positioning? Did you want to talk through any of the other things that fall within it? Destruction, skating out of bounds, failure to reform, failure to return, failure to yield. How much time do you usually give to people to reform after a call? I love that question because I will yell from the mountaintops until forever. It is not time-based. You'll hear so many people say, wait a beat, wait about 3 seconds. Somebody who is at a complete standstill is going to be more able to get somewhere quicker, react quicker than somebody who's moving at full speed. So you got to think, were they able to hear me? first and foremost, always with any communication that you have with players. Were they able to hear me? Was the verbal cue correct? Is there any reason to think that it might have been confusing? Once you can get past all of that, did they realistically have enough time to hear what you were saying, interpret it, and then take the next needed action? So if somebody is skating at full speed and they need to come to a complete stop and then go the opposite direction in order to do the thing that they're needing to do, that's going to take that person a little bit longer than somebody who's just standing there and then needs to go back and do what they need to do. So it's more about the effort of, are they attempting to do the thing that they're supposed to be doing now, more so than how long did it take them, if that makes sense. Cool. Anything else? Any other questions?
I do have a quick question. Is it possible? Sorry, I can't type as fast as my brain goes. So, is it possible to have illegal contact within a pack?
Illegal contact? Yes. You can be making contact to a down skater. You can be making contact while you're down. Yeah, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things for illegal contact that have nothing to do with engagement zone or in play.
Anything but like gaining speed outside of the track, to that, would that fall under illegal contact, or is that even a penalty if the people gain speed?
So there's, I think, two things that come to mind for me immediately with that sort of with the wording that you used. You cannot gain speed out of bounds to achieve something in the game, to have impact, like gain something for yourself in the game. So as a jammer, I think is one of the easier things to kind of think about. If you're a jammer who's going around the track opposite side of the pack and you're cutting that inside line just to shorten your distance around the track, that's one of those things that falls under, you wouldn't penalize it for it happening once. It's generally agreed that that's not enough impact to penalize for. But if you start seeing that same jammer or that same team cut that corner and skate out of bounds to lessen their distance around the track multiple times, 3 or more times, then it can fall under what is termed as like habitual action. And you can penalize for that, because at that point it is having impact to the game. So skating out of bounds to gain yourself shorter distance around the track can be penalizable, usually if it's more habitual. The other one that I think of in that category, and that would be the illegal positioning penalty. The other one that comes to mind is gaining momentum while out of bounds to then come inbounds and directly make contact with somebody. So if you are coming back from the box and you're gaining speed while you're out of bounds, and then you come in bounds and immediately play offense and clear out an entire line, you wouldn't have been able to do that without having gained the momentum from out of bounds. So that would be an illegal contact penalty.
Thank you.
You made contact doing an illegal thing positioning wise. Separately, would you say it's a little bit time-based for illegal contact as after a no pack is yelled?
I can clarify that one. Can
Thank
you clarify? You said that for illegal positioning, specifically failure to reform, you don't like to think of it as time-based, which makes sense. So I was just asking for something that's a little bit related, like illegal contact after that no pack warning is yelled. Do you try to think of that a little bit time-based at all?
I would dare to say, I'll continue thinking if anything pops up into my head, but I would dare to say I don't think of anything as time-based. No pack, same thing. You need to know that they had enough time to understand the call and take the needed action. Late hits, and I think what you're saying, illegal contact during a no pack, you need to take into consideration if that was just the continuation of an action that had already started. So if somebody's already at full speed and right before a no pack is called, they make contact, it's not realistic to think that they would have been able to stop themselves from that contact. That was in motion before that no pack was called, and it's not reasonable to expect that they could have done anything different at that point. So I would not consider that a penalty.
So maybe it's even accurate to say the opposite then is your philosophy that like uh you should probably at least give somebody a second for most things is almost what you're saying.
I mean, skating skill kind of comes into play a little bit here too. It's admittedly a little bit of a weird grounds to start talking about skating skill, but I feel it does come into play. If you know that a skater is very high level at what they're doing and they could have moved quicker at a faster pace, quicker reaction, and they just didn't, versus a skater who is brand new. This is their very first game. They are having a rough time even just like staying upright. It's likely going to take that person a little bit longer. So I think that's something to consider too. So a second, I don't know. I try to not even think time based. Just realistically, does it seem like that person could have done anything different given all of the information that I have? What was happening around them? What was happening at the time? What is their own ability that we've seen through the game so far? Those kind of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Not to hog time, but I actually have an example question as well, similarly to the skating skill. Something that came up recently in a scrimmage was like there was a skater who, right as the jam ended, picked up a lot of speed heading towards a turn. Looked like they were trying to pass a couple blockers to, or sorry, it was a jammer trying to pass a couple blockers, get a couple points right as the jam ended, and it was unclear whether that counted as skating out of bounds because it was as if they had directed that trajectory to pass the two blockers to get 2 points, knowing that they were going to skate directly out of bounds. And that seemed like a relevant example of like where skill comes into play as a question, if that made sense.
Yeah, totally. That is a great point. I think there is a differentiation between, did it take you a little bit longer to return to legal play versus were you not in control of yourself that then led into an illegal action, or like including skating out of bounds or contact. So if it takes somebody a little bit longer because of their skating skill to come back from being out of play, that I feel is very different than somebody got up to a speed that is beyond safety for their own abilities, and then that caused them to skate out of bounds or make contact with somebody. They are still responsible for their own self, their skating, their body, no matter their skill. So yeah, I think that falls under, it would likely still be penalizable. Even if it was skill based, like they are responsible for being able to react given their own skating ability, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like by making the decision to get to that speed was kind of where they committed the penalty, even though it didn't happen yet.
Yeah, but I think that is an important thing to keep in mind too. The difference between, I can recognize that it's taking this person a little bit longer to reform a pack or to get back into play. Again, not time-based, but I can tell that they're making an effort, so I'm not going to penalize them, versus, yeah, the only reason that happened is because they weren't in control of themselves, but they should be in control of themselves, and that could be a danger to themselves or other people. That's a different category.
Thank you.
Okay. Again, if anything else comes up around illegal positioning, feel free to ask. We'll move on to multiplayer blocks. So again, the hand signal, you're clinging both your hands together, and this is where you cannot link or create an impenetrable wall. We'll move right into the examples because this one's a little bit easier with some visuals. So there are two different types. There is the link, which is the photo is more on the right, where there is actual like grasping of each other. And the grasping can be hand to hand, like in the photo. It can be on somebody's shoulder. It can even be on a teammate's leg. It can be grasping of any kind that is creating a link. There's also the impenetrable wall, which is on the left side. You can see on the left picture, if someone were to make contact to the back of these two players in between the seam, they would have to break these people's arms to get through it. So that is an impenetrable wall. That still counts as a multiplayer, even though neither of them are grasping at all. They're creating this link that would have to go beyond safety to get through. The middle picture, they are crossing arms, but that is more like a saloon door. Like somebody coming from behind them into the seam could push through those arms without having to break any bones because they're not against each other's backs or anything. The other thing about the picture on the right, even though the link itself is not being challenged by that skater with the white helmet, it is still in the trajectory of that player, and it can still be determined that those two blockers would not be able to stay together and continue blocking that person in that way had they not had that link in front of them. So directly challenging a link or it being in the trajectory of the person challenging the link. The difference there, if that person in the white helmet on that far right picture was making contact to the outside of that blocker with the white shirt, 1-8, if they were making contact to the outside shoulder and not within the trajectory of that link, even if they weren't linked, that link doesn't seem to be helping anything. It's not keeping those two people together because that blocker is not trying to get in between them. So you wouldn't call that. It does have to be in the trajectory of where that skater is trying to go. I thought there was a change last year that made the middle one also a multiplayer. Not that I know of. Why? If you can recall what you might have heard it being called, or like the reasoning. Is picture 2 a multiplayer if approaching from the camera point of view? It could be. Their hands are kind of a little loosey-goosey and not really fully crossing each other's bodies. But if they were fully crossing each other's bodies, like the picture on the left, it could be. Yeah. Direction doesn't matter. It's just whether your arm is bracing against somebody else to create this, like, I'd have to break your arm to get through it sort of situation. Yeah, I don't believe there was any clarification that would make that middle picture a penalty. There's no link. They would be able to use the back of their arm legally to continue blocking. A person could reasonably get through there without having to break anybody's arm. I don't see a reason for that to be called a multiplayer, that middle picture. So I don't believe there was a clarification about that. But, language of rules, not confusing at all. It's been a common discussion for us lately. It could be that we misread it. Yeah, there's a lot of things that once they're written into the rules, it is then realized that regionally it's being read a little bit different. And then that's why like clarifications and the casebook entries come out. So yeah, it's just the name of the game, really. All right. Some GIF examples. So white pivot and white 810 maintain a link in the jammer's trajectory as the purple jammer attempts to challenge it. So right up here, these two players link way up front. You can see they stay linked all the way through this. And you can even see that the jammer kind of moves them apart a little bit, but they're able to get back together because they're holding on to each other. So that definitely had impact on the jammer not being able to get through them. Some things to get through here. If you can see who is most responsible for the link, issue the penalty to them. If you cannot tell who's more responsible, just call the person who's more visible to you, who's easier to call, faster to get them off the track. Sometimes it looks like both people are equally holding on, both creating a link simultaneously. Penalize the one you can get off the track. Easier, faster, more visible. If you cannot see the number of the person more responsible, but you can see the number of the other players involved, call the person you can see to get them off the track. So this happens a lot where one player is grasping onto their teammate. Their teammate isn't grasping onto anything. Their teammate isn't causing a multiplayer at all, but I cannot see the person who is actually grasping. I can't see their number at all. Both these players are still part of this action. So if I can see that other person, even though they're not contributing to this, they're still part of it, you can still call that other person. I would explain later to the team if there was any questions or anything, because that can certainly be a little bit confusing, and just say, you were issued because there was a multiplayer call. You may have not been the one directly causing it, but you were part of it, and I was able to get you off the track sooner. If you have to have that like conversation about what just happened. The longer you let a multiplayer go on, the higher impact it has through the game. So you just really need to get somebody off the track as soon as you can. Another thing about multiplayers, you'll see sometimes where there is a link, someone hits and challenges the link, and then the link is dropped. It is good to drop the link, but you also need to consider, did it drop after it already had impact? If it dropped after it already made that person come to a stop or significantly slowed them down, it already had impact, and it can still be called a multiplayer even though they dropped it. So if anything, they should drop it before the contact happens. That's everything I had for multiplayers. Any multiplayer questions? Okay. We'll move on to illegally gaining position, cuts, and illegal reentries. Would it be beneficial for anyone to go over a visual using like, I don't know if everybody's familiar with the Nerd Space link, but it just has little dots you can move around to like give examples of players on a track. Does anybody have questions just about what a cut is in general? We'll go through some examples and things, but I wanted to just start there. It's when you're using the outside of the boundary to come in front of everybody who had superior position. And again, if anybody has questions on what superior position is, let's chat about it. Just let me know. All right, we'll move into the examples. So in this example, black blocker 888 initiates contact on the white jammer, causing that jammer to go out of bounds. The moment white jammer goes out of bounds, black 1-3, the pivot, has superior position. Both the initiator, black 888, and the black pivot recycle back so that their hips are behind the white jammer's hips before the white jammer re-enters the track. So the white jammer cut both the initiator and the non-initiator in this example. This is another example why it's really important. You can kind of see off to the side this OPR. You see their skate for a second, but it's really important to be right in line with this action to see the moment someone goes out and the moment they come back in where all of the different hips of the players involved are, so that you can see if they did or did not come in front or behind people who had superior position. Positioning, still the most important thing. All right, next one. So white 7, the jammer, cuts one non-initiator. Black 1057 initiates on the white jammer, sending them out of bounds. Black 904 had superior position when the white jammer went out of bounds and recycles backwards while the white jammer is out of bounds. The white jammer enters behind the initiator's hips, but not behind black 904's hips. So you can see in the middle of the track, 904 runs back. The white jammer seemingly only really looks at the person who knocked them out of bounds and not the non-initiators, comes back in, but not before black 904 already recycled back. We can talk a little bit through initiator and non-initiator and sort of the rules around that sort of stuff here for a second. We can definitely talk about it more in future sessions because it is a little bit tricky. I'll admit that part. But if you are the initiator of, say you are the initiator of this hit that sends the white jammer out of bounds. If you, as the initiator that sent them out of bounds, lose position, you go down, you go out of bounds, you go out of play, you can no longer draw that cut. So as the initiator, you need to be aware whether you still have superior position or not. The moment you go out of bounds or down or out of play, you no longer have superior position. You can no longer draw that cut. Non-initiators are different. Non-initiators, if they are actively down, out of bounds, or out of play, You can't consider them as having superior position, but they can regain superior position. So if you are Black 904 in this example, the non-initiator who runs back, if they went down, if they turned to run backwards and they fell onto one of their knees, if the jammer came back in when that person was on their knee, all good. No penalty to call there because that person can't have superior position while they're down. However, if they stood back up before the white jammer came in, still would be a call. You can reestablish superior position as a non-initiator. So you can go out of bounds, come back in, you have superior position again. You can go out of play, come back into play, you have superior position again. The reason that it's different is it was determined that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for an officiating crew to keep track of the status of every single player on the track and whether they are or aren't down, upright, out of bounds, out of play. But it is easy enough to watch the initiator. It was determined that officials can watch whether an initiator goes down or out or what have you to no longer have superior position. But it's not realistic to get to have that level of detail about literally every single player. So for every other player, you just need to know the moment that white jammer comes back in where the opposing players are. Does that make sense? I know that's like a whole lot of words about if that, then this, but not if that, if that. But is that clear for anybody? Does anybody want to talk through that a little bit more? It comes up a lot.
Would this also would it also qualify for like if two members of their own team were down, like had fallen down as well? Like could they have gained access? Could they have gotten a track cut if it was their own skaters? Because I believe you can only cut one legally of your own skaters. So would this also happen in that regard? Or could
that is a little bit different because they're teammates. You can always cut one teammate, whether it's returning from the box or from just being knocked out of bounds. If a player is not upright or in bounds or in play, then they're not considered in play and they can't have superior position. So if your entire team falls down for whatever reason, you could technically come in front of all of them as long as you came in while they were still all down. I would say don't try to turn this into a strategy because embellishment is a penalty if you just purposefully fall down to try to make that a strategy. So don't do that. But yeah, that is something to consider too for teammates. If the teammates are inbounds, upright, in play, all the same stuff. Anything else on cuts? Okay, share. Saw something interesting at a game this weekend. The initiator knocked the jammer out of bounds and then fell down. Then the non-initiators who did not have superior position moved ahead of the out of bounds jammer. Jammer re-entered in front of them and was surprised at the cut call. Wait, what? Moved ahead of the out of bounds jammer?
So this could be a misunderstanding, but the jammer went out of bounds, and then those blockers, I think technically they reestablished superior position while the jammer was out of bounds, right? But the jammer was just thinking in terms of that the block, like the snapshot at the time of the block. And so the jammer was thinking, well, I was ahead of those people before, so I can still re-enter in front of them.
That is true. That's where I might be confused.
Maybe I'm describing it wrong, but
maybe this would help to use. The diagram I was talking about. All right, so let's get this out of European Derby. All right. So white jammer, black blocker, you are saying, so this black number 1 blocks white jammer out of bounds, but then also goes out of bounds. And then all of these, the remaining black blockers, move ahead?
Yes.
So at this point right here, the only person who has superior position on the white jammer is black blocker number 1. So if they get knocked out of bounds, the only people that a person who is knocked out of bounds has to come in behind is anybody who had superior position, which in this case would only be this black blocker. If this black blocker goes out of bounds, then they don't have to come in behind anybody.
So even if the other black blockers get ahead of the jammer in the meantime, while the jammer's still out of bounds.
So if they're both out of bounds and then all of these people gain position here, who is the white jammer cutting? Because they're all ahead of the white jammer.
No, the jammer re-entered in front of them. That's
okay. So they all moved up here, and then this person came up and then re-entered over here.
Yes, because the jammer was only thinking in terms of the person who knocked them out.
I dare to say that that jammer is correct.
Okay.
I don't know this scenario, I wasn't there, but per the rules, it is only the people who had superior position at the moment you went out of bounds. So if that was the case and this was the only person, doesn't matter if these people move up, they can still come in front.
Okay. So that's an interesting example.
What you'll see a lot of too is this black blocker will be the only one with superior position. We'll hit them out. All the other black blockers will still recycle anyway. And this jammer who doesn't have to come in behind them just wants to play it safe and will come back behind everybody anyway. When you're returning from the box, it is considered everybody has superior position on you who's in play and upright and in bounds. So you do have to come in behind everybody minus one teammate at most if you're returning from the box. All right, we can keep going. If anything else around cuts comes up, please keep asking. But let's talk about gaining position and no earned pass a little bit. I'll just read this. So it is illegal for a skater to use the out of bounds area to gain position on someone who is upright and in bounds. This action is referred to as cutting the track. That's what we've been chatting about. But I want to get to the part down here. If a skater is put out of bounds due to an opponent's block, the skater must return inbounds behind that opponent, even if the skater was in front of the opponent before being blocked out. So what that is saying, we'll use this black blocker number 1 again. So right now, white jammer has not earned a pass on black blocker number 1. They have not passed their hips. Even if white blocker knocks or black blocker knocks them out of bounds with this jammer never having passed them, they still have to come in behind them because cuts are based on the initiator. Doesn't matter if they were in front or not. They are the initiator of the hit. And then all of the initiators have to have superior position. So that's the difference. Anybody who did not have superior position, like this black blocker number 3 back here, white jammer does not need to come behind them. These two black blockers up here do have superior position because they're in front. So this jammer would have to come in behind them. And then regardless of whether black blocker number 1 was in front or behind, when they made the hit, they made the hit. So they would have to come in behind them as long as this person stayed in bounds, upright, all that stuff. So that's all that's saying. Doesn't matter where the initiator is. They are the initiator. The people do still need to come in behind the initiator. And then no earned pass. The hand signal is you are passing around. You are like two little people and you are passing around. And that is if you earn a pass on someone, but there's no penalty involved. You didn't earn a point, you didn't earn a pass, but there's also no call to make. So for example, the scenario we were talking about before, if black blocker number 1 knocks this person out of bounds, but then also goes out of bounds and this white jammer decides to come in front and re-enter, that black blocker no longer had superior position, could no longer pull the cut call. So even though this person did come in front, they didn't earn a pass on that person. There's no penalty to call on that person. I do want to note sometimes you'll see maybe OPRs giving a no earned pass signal, that it is still important to keep track of anybody who's on the inside line, because typically an OPR calling a no earned pass is mostly only looking at the action that's happening on the outside line, the initiator, anybody who's closer to the outside line. There may be non-initiators on the inside line that everybody on the infield still needs to keep track of. So I've certainly run into conversations with coaches who were like, but you did the no earned pass. Why did we get a penalty? It's like, yes, you did get a no earned pass for the initiator, but there was other people still in the game doing things. And that's why there's 7 of us. We are each kind of owning our zone and keeping track of our own area. So while one person is communicating, this is what I'm seeing in my area, everybody else still has other areas that stuff is going on. So don't confuse a no earned pass hand signal with there's absolutely no penalty to call here. Another thing to consider, one hand out of bounds or down does not change someone's status. One hand down is still upright. One hand down is still inbounds. You'll see sometimes people use this non-standardized hand signal where you just point to your palm, and that is used to say they did go out, they did go down, but it was only one hand, so technically they're still upright, they're still in bounds. Any questions on gaining position or no earned pass?
What was that signal?
For the one hand down?
Yeah, what did you do?
Pointing to the center of your palm.
Oh, cool.
He's like, yep, down, but there is just one hand. It's a non-standardized one. It's not from WFTDA. It's just sort of a thing that came up through the community of officiating, and it's used in a bunch of regions. All right. So let's see an example of no earned pass. So black 111 initiates on the white jammer, causing the white jammer to go out of bounds. Black 111 then also goes out of bounds, and so they've lost their superior position on the white jammer. White jammer re-enters behind all non-initiators who had superior position when they were out of bounds, but re-enters in front of the initiator, black 111. So this is a no earned pass. The only person who was able to draw that cut was the initiator, and the initiator went out. So there's no call to make. And you can see the official on the bottom does the no earned pass hand signal. And then I had a note, but we already talked about it. Non-initiators can re-establish their superior position. So if this, who are they, black 111 was a non-initiator, so say black 13 made the contact here, if the black 111 went out of bounds, but they were back in bounds before the white jammer re-entered, they could have still drawn that cut. That's what we were talking about earlier with non-initiators can re-establish their superior position, but initiators cannot. So in this scenario, doesn't matter that black 111 was fully back in bounds by the time the white jammer came back in, because at that point they already lost their ability to draw that cut as the initiator. Keep going. So here, the initiator receives a forearm penalty, so the jammer doesn't need to re-enter behind them. Did the jammer cut a non-initiator? Cross communication between OPRs and jam refs and IPRs is crucial in making the right call. So let's see, where are we here? So you can see that white blocker in the green helmet, and their teammate calls for the cut. But this OPR was trying to signal that person who knocked the purple jammer out of bounds for a forearm. And seemingly smart purple jammer saw that there was a penalty being called on that person and knew that they no longer had to come in behind them. And this is an example, kind of like I was saying earlier, where they no longer had to come in behind that initiator because the initiator got a penalty, but you still got to pay attention to, did that purple jammer come in front of the other white blockers on the track? that part's not super clear. Like it looks like this purple jammer might have come in front of this other white blocker who was a non-initiator. So make sure you don't lose all of your attention to a scenario like this and you still keep sort of a gauge on what else is going on around you. All right, so here, when the black jammer goes out of bounds, it does not appear that the white 316, the pivot, has superior position. This person kind of bridging right in the middle right here. So when the black jammer goes out, it doesn't appear like that pivot had superior position. The white pivot then moves backwards and raises their arm, sort of like a, hey, I'm here, consider me, trying to draw the cut. The gem ref issues a cut. You never know with angles like this what they saw versus what we're seeing from this angle, but it could have been an error. You really need the full snapshot of when someone went out of bounds in order to accurately gauge who had superior position in that moment. So make sure you're not hyper focusing on just what's exactly in front of you and then just assume that, well, that person's back there and they're raising their arms. So I'm just going to assume that they probably had position and I should probably make this cut. You really got to have the full picture because you'll see this like, hey, all the time. Players do it all the time. And you need to know whether they actually had superior position or not. All right, that's everything for cuts and no earned passes. Any questions about any of this before we move on to interfering with the flow of the game? Cool. Interfering with the flow of the game. So some examples: not fielding any blockers at a jam start, not fielding a jammer, or not fielding any blockers at a jam start, not fielding a jammer at the jam start, successfully calling a timeout when your team doesn't have any left, anyone beyond the C or the A successfully calling a timeout, fielding a skater too soon after a clock stoppage due to injury, those sorts of things that interfere with the flow of the game. I don't really have GIF examples of these because it would be weird to have GIF examples of these, but does anybody have any questions around interference penalties? You're delaying the game. How to handle some of the scenarios of the examples that I just mentioned. So jam timers can actually call these in association and in addition to anybody on skates who has a whistle. But jam timers can call these too. If you are about to start a jam as the jam timer and you see that there is nobody from an entire team on the track, do the 5 seconds. And then instead of doing the drop arm and tweet of starting the jam, when the jam should have started, go immediately into 4 whistles and into a timeout and issue that interference penalty to the team's captain. So as the jam timer, you have a really good vantage point to watch for this sort of thing, but also anybody on skates can also call that. All right, we'll keep moving. Other illegal procedures. So these are things like equipment violation, somebody's missing gear, a uniform violation, they don't have numbers on their arm and it prevented you from being able to call them for something. Leaving the penalty box too soon when they weren't supposed to. There's a caveat to that. We'll talk a little bit about each of these a little bit more. And then star pass. In star pass interference. I think we talked about this when we covered metrics last time, but star passes add an additional metric to take into consideration around penalties. So if a stop block may not have been called, or like any sort of contact penalty may have not been called because it wasn't having enough impact on what was actually going on, if it is preventing the pass from happening, I think last time we talked about if you're like swatting somebody's forearm, without a star pass happening, that's just kind of an annoying thing, but not necessarily penalizable. But if you're swatting somebody's arm as they're trying to pass the star, then you are impacting the game in that way. So star pass interference. Equipment violation. it is important to know that toe stops are not required. You'll see toe stops come off all the time in games. It's not required for anybody to wear them at all. So if it comes off, you don't need to stop the jam or anything, or penalize anybody for not wearing them. Somebody skates onto the track and the jam starts and they're not wearing knee pads, that's a different thing. If a mouth guard comes out or the hard shell of somebody's equipment comes out, somebody's helmet flies off, if some part of their equipment comes off, that is a requirement for risk management, and they don't stop, their first action isn't to immediately stop and rectify the situation, get their mouth guard back in, get the equipment back on, then you should end the jam, call a timeout, end the jam, and issue that penalty for an equipment violation. Uniform violation, numbers. I would not issue a penalty to somebody just because they're not wearing numbers. I would only really call that if it interfered with me trying to communicate with them. So if I go and try to give some sort of warning or some sort of communication where I need that person's number and I can't get their number because they're not wearing a number on their arm, and it's clear that it didn't just like wipe off from sweat or something, it's just clear that they didn't have a number at all. Maybe they were wearing armbands in the first half and they didn't put them on in the second half. If it prevents you from doing what you need to be able to do, then I would penalize it. Otherwise, after the jam was over, I would just go over to either the team or that skater and say, hey, can you get some numbers on your arm? No reason to be like super ticky-tacky about penalizing for that if it didn't really have impact on the game. The impact on the game is if it prevented you from being able to communicate with them using their number. Leaving the penalty box too soon. Technically, if they leave without being given the done verbal cue, but their time actually was done, not penalizable. Only penalizable if they left when they weren't supposed to. So you'll see this pretty frequently with jammer swaps. So if both jammers know that this is just a one-to-one, just a normal A-B jammer swap, as soon as that second jammer hits, the first jammer might take off before the penalty box manager says anything, and that's fine, as long as that person didn't have a second penalty or something, you know. They don't necessarily have to wait for the verbal cue to leave as long as they're correct about being done with their time. If they're not, then we're getting into an illegal procedure for leaving the penalty box too soon. Penalty box violation. All right, I think I saw something from Cher. I'm waiting for an opportunity for us to practice delay of game, but we're too nice at practices and tell people what's wrong even after 5 seconds instead of starting the jam on time. So I would say it is still the responsibility of the officials to try to help teams not do illegal things. If you have an opportunity to give a warning that isn't like completely throwing you out of position or anything, you might hear some people say like, hey, watch your wheels, watch the line for pivot line and jam line stuff. I think what I've seen most conversations happen around that is to not do it after the 5 seconds is called, especially because a lot of teams use it as part of their strategy. They'll line up illegally on purpose for whatever strategy that they have. So I try not to like overly communicate about it. But you might hear little like guidances, things like that, just to avoid having to give those sorts of penalties. But yeah, I would counter what you said with niceness. It's nice to call things the way it's going to be called in the game so that people can learn. It's less nice to never call it and then people don't even know that it's real, and then they get into a game and get a bunch of penalties that they didn't know about. So I understand what you mean by nice, and I'm going to counter by saying it's nice to also follow the way it should be done. All right. So here, Blue 508 is issued a penalty for failing to reform the pack, and they remain on the track. That's not the illegal procedure. That's a P penalty. That's a play penalty. But they remain on the track through the entire pack and across the entire straightaway on their way to the penalty box. So that's an example of staying on the track, a legal procedure penalty. Caveat to this. There was an update to the rules about staying on the track too long after being penalized. I remember it as there's sort of two categories of thing that can happen to somebody after they've already been issued a penalty. They either just stay on the track too long and they cut their distance to the penalty box by staying on the track, and that's an example here. They didn't make contact with anybody. They didn't continue playing derby. They just cut their distance to the penalty box. That's an illegal procedure. If they get issued a penalty and they keep playing derby, they keep making contact, they don't break away from their tripod, they're continuing to play, that's a misconduct. So just little differences around what to call if somebody is not leaving the track after they've been issued a penalty. But that's everything for illegal procedures. Any questions on illegal procedures? Cool. So unsporting conduct, misconducts, insubordinations. In the picture here, the hand signal is a swipe across the chest. In the pictures here, the white jammer came into the penalty box at such a speed that they fell over the back and flipped the seat. So that's reckless entry, misconduct call. You can see this bench on the right side is on its side because this jammer literally hit it and then just flew over the backside of it. So reckless entry, misconduct penalty. Like I said before, continuing to play and having impact after a penalty has been assessed can be misconduct for failing to exit, continuing to play derby after being penalized. You can also issue misconducts for verbal unsporting conduct. I hear this one talked about a lot as in, well, they didn't curse. Well, they didn't say it directly to me. That's not necessarily important or the metric. The verbiage in the rules is that if it paints the organization, the sport in a negative light. So things can be a little bit indirect, but still be unsporting. But definitely if somebody is like directly being unkind to officials or things, that's definitely a call. But I do want to point out that it doesn't necessarily need to be curse words. It doesn't necessarily need to be directed. But if you do feel it is escalated to the point of that's unsporting or not putting the sport into a positive light, it can either be a conversation, a bit of a warning, or penalized for it. You do also need to keep in mind it is a full contact sport with a lot of adrenaline. Sometimes somebody goes down really hard and the first thing that they do is scream an obscenity. You can kind of understand that. I wouldn't necessarily penalize for that because it was due to a thing that happened to them. So not all yelling of curse words may be penalized either. Pinning falls under this. So pinning is if you are, if you're familiar with like what a do-si-do is, if you have like somebody else's arm around you, if you are squeezing them, even if I'm using everything legal, like my side plank and my upper arm, I can use all of this legally to play derby. But if I'm clamping down on somebody, even though this is all legal, the clamping part of it is pinning. That is unsporting. That can be a misconduct. And you see that with like clamping between your arm and your leg too. You see that sometimes. So any sort of clamping down or pinning. And then embellishment, it used to be called flopping. I'm glad that they changed it to embellishment because flopping is a weird word to say during roller derby. But if you can determine that somebody intentionally fell to try to draw a penalty of some kind, that can be a misconduct for unsporting. What about hooking a player arm in yours? That does come up a lot, just kind of by happenstance, is sort of what happens next. So a lot of players are tracking all the time. A lot of jammers are kind of using their arms all the time. In a similar vein of it's not a forearm until it does something, just hooking somebody isn't necessarily penalizable. But if that person is trying to get away from being hooked and they can't because they're being hooked, then yes. So think about what happens directly after that, whether it continues, whether the person is trying to get away from that or not. If the attempt is being made to stop what is happening, sometimes everybody's so jammed together, there's not a whole lot anybody can really do. But if it's having impact, it's having impact. Does that help clear it up? Do you have any follow-ups to that? Would that be a misconduct? It could. So hooking could sort of be one of two things, I think, mainly. Hooking could be a impeding forearm if you are hooking using more of your forearm to impede them from moving. Pinning is more like I have you clamped against my body part and you can't pull yourself out of it. That would be the misconduct. Otherwise, if you're just like not letting them go because you're impeding them with your forearm, that could be a forearm call. Oh no, wait, hang on, not yet. We have an example. So unsporting conduct, black blocker and white jammer both go down near the front of the pack. There's no penalty there for them going down. However, it was determined that the white jammer had enough time and ability to avoid making further contact to the downed black blocker, but instead they attempted to jump over them. White jammer makes avoidable contact to a downed black blocker. So that was, they were issued contact to a downed skater. Actually, I believe would be a C now, not a misconduct. I just didn't update this. But here's an example of an illegal contact penalty, not a misconduct. Rules be changing, my bad. This is a C, not a G. But here's an example of blocking a down skater. Back to unsporting conducts, though. Any questions on any of these? Insubordinations, misconducts?
With the misconducts, say they're already going in for a penalty, like with the coming in too hot to the penalty box. Do those misconducts stack on top of the already penalty they already might be serving?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Penalty box manager can call those. Anybody else who sees it with a whistle can call those. And yep, it's an additional penalty. So you can definitely have that person cut and then they didn't leave the track. So now they have 2 and then they came into the box hot and that's 3 in a row. You can get 3 in a row just in one trip.
So they would be serving a full minute half penalty? Okay.
I mean, unless you get into the jammer swap scenarios, but we're not going to dive into that today. Any other questions about unsporting conduct, misconducts? Well, that's everything that I had for the rest of the penalties. Did anything come up at scrimmage that y'all chatted about? Or anything that we discussed last time? Or literally anything at all around metrics or how to make a call or any of the actual penalties?
Back in, so I was doing the jam timer, and since it was scrimmage and first time doing any sort of jam timer, it was kind of loosey-goosey, but when it comes to jam timing, it's the 30 seconds in between jam, and you give the 5 second warning at 25 second. Is there at any point you do a rolling whistle telling the teams, hey, get ready? Or is that in actual play, is it kind of the teams need to know?
So if you're specifically talking about during a game, there wasn't a timeout, there wasn't any clock stoppage for any reason, it's literally just the 30 seconds in between jams, no. The only reason you would do rolling whistles is coming back from a timeout or at the start of the game or start of the period. And even then, if I can see that both teams are already lined up, they're both already looking at me, they're both even aware of that we're about to start, I don't even necessarily always do a rolling whistle at that point, before the game starts or before the second period starts. That one is more so to make sure that the full crew is aware that we're about to start and both teams that are aware that we're about to start. But I think to answer your question, no, you wouldn't do a rolling whistle just because it might seem that teams aren't aware that we're about to start. That is their responsibility. They can call a timeout if they need it. And that's also why you give the 5-second warning. So I've certainly seen where teams are chatting, doing whatever. They're not on the track yet. Somebody calls 5 seconds and they're like, oh no, we need to do something. And maybe they'll call a timeout right away so that they don't get a penalty. Or maybe they're lined up close enough to the track that they're all able to get onto the track within that 5-second warning.
Yeah. Okay. And just to clarify once again, if there is that interference where they're not ready within that 30-second window, it's the 4 whistle, stop the jam, and then call timeout and then call an interference.
Yep. I wouldn't even say stop the jam. I would say it's to call a timeout the moment the jam was supposed to start. It's not necessarily a bad thing if you start the jam and then stop it. But the better way to do it is to 5 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, tweet, straight into the timeout when the jam was supposed to start, and then call the interference penalty. It's helpful if you know who the captain is, because that's who you're going to be calling it to, or you can just simply say like white team captain interference, and then whoever the powers that be, anybody who could maybe get to that person faster than you could as the jam timer, can go and give the full verbal cue.
Okay.
But yeah. And then, yeah, I saw your note about next whistle starts the jam. I personally, again, this is just me. Your mileage may vary. Do whatever fits what you do. I really only give those if it seems like they're needed, and I don't necessarily yell it. I really only say it loud enough so that the people on the track who are about to be in the next jam hear me. So I'll be like, hey, next whistle is going to start the jam, and then I'll get in place and do the loud 5-second call. Audio exhaustion is a real thing. I try to not be yelling all the time, making a lot of noise all the time, blowing a bunch of extra whistles that don't need to be blown all the time, just because it's a lot through a game to hear that much loud noise all the time. So I try to dial it back here and there when I can. So if you ever see me as a jam timer, I'm more like, hey, everybody, we're about to start the jam. 5 seconds. You know, it's a difference. You're communicating to different people for different reasons for those like extra bits of communication. It's not wrong if you do it. It's not wrong if you are loud with those sorts of warnings the same as you are with your 5 seconds. Those are just things that I take into consideration with that. Anything else? I'll take this moment to also mention our next discussion is going to be about pack. I believe it's our last one, if I have that right, Karnage?
I think
Or is
so?
it the second to last one?
Let's see, 1, 2. I think it's the second to last one.
Second to last one. Yeah, I think the last one is psychology.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one's going to be about pack and the engagement zone. Is there a designated official who is empowered to call official timeouts? Anybody with a whistle. Any official can call for one. Any official with a whistle can call one. Just make sure that as a crew, you're all on the same page about what things do need a timeout, what things may not necessarily need a timeout. You don't want to jump into a timeout after every single jam, especially if it's for things that could be fixed later on. You know, if we are 3 minutes left in the period and we're unsure if this person has 1 penalty or 2 penalties, that can probably wait. That person's not about to foul out. It would take a lot for that person to foul out within 3 minutes with that many penalties left. So something like that, I wouldn't stop the game that close to the end of the period just to try to correct. I would probably wait until halftime to do that. So those are the sorts of things that as a crew you should chat with each other about. I know, like, as a head ref, I'm like, don't worry about whether I'm in position or not. Start the jam unless I call for a timeout. So those sorts of things. But yeah, anybody can call one. Is it true for team timeouts as well? No. So team timeouts can only be called by the team's designated C or A. So the C is a captain. They have to be somebody playing in the game. They have to be a skater. They have to be wearing a C somewhere on their body. The A doesn't have to be on skates. It can be a coach. A lot of the times it is a coach, but it can also be a player on the team. So that one could be either or. C has to be a player in the game. A can be a player or a coach, and they have to be wearing an A somewhere on their body. So they have to be one of those people, and they have to be wearing that letter on them in order to call a timeout. And they have to have timeouts left. Is it true for team timeouts as well? I mean, officials? Wait, sorry, what?
Meaning, can any official call a team timeout when, like, say I'm the A and I'm like trying to call for a team timeout? I get a lot of refs that like look at me but then don't say anything, and like they're trying to get the head official, and I'm like, can anybody with a whistle call a team timeout?
Yes, they can and should. So the things that an official needs to take into consideration in order to call a timeout. Look at the scoreboard, make sure that that team has any left. Look at the person signaling for it, make sure that they are the C or the A and they are actually wearing the C or the A on them. Once you're able to determine both of those things, then call the timeout. It can be anybody. Some coaches always go for the jam timer, but it can be anybody. I also see a lot of coaches who completely refrain from ever leaving the team's bench area, and they'll just like jump up and down trying to signal, especially if the starting position is on like the opposite side of the track or there's like nobody around you. Coaches can walk into the infield to call a timeout. Just make yourself more visible to the people instead of like signaling a thing to the back of a bunch of people's heads, you know. But to your question, yes, anybody with a whistle can call it and should. If someone who is not an A or C calls a timeout, what is the penalty? That is an interference for delay of game. You can see the very last bullet point. A team member who is neither the captain nor the designated alternate successfully requesting a team timeout or official review. I've heard that the head ref might use one of that team's timeouts or official review anyway if that happens. They shouldn't. I've certainly seen, I've done myself, someone calls for an OR and the thing that they're ORing is either just not a thing or we already issued it. That actually happened recently. The team came in and they requested a penalty for a low block, and we had already issued it. We issued it after the jam was over, but we issued it before they called that OR. So I just said, hey, we actually already issued that penalty, so we can count this as your OR or we can count it as a team timeout, whichever one you might prefer. If you're able to have that quick discussion quick enough that you can not take a timeout at all, cool, but that all comes down to game flow, trying to make sure that it's fair for everybody involved. But officials should not use a team's timeout just because they weren't wearing a C or an A. You might be thinking of if a team calls for an OR and they don't have any ORs left, but they do have timeouts left, then you can just use it as a team timeout. That is one scenario that you can do that. So if you already stopped the clock and you're like, hey, you actually didn't have any ORs, so this is just going to be a timeout, that's totally fine. That late penalty is often why it takes so long for an OPR to call the timeout. I'm particularly bad at this, making sure the C or the A is calling and making sure the team has timeouts left. Yeah. Yep.
Mark, I have a question. So, I don't know what the word for this is, which is part of the question. So, when say a jammer gets knocked to the outside of the track, and so they need to come in behind the initiator or it's going to be a cut. And they do that thing where they kind of come onto the track and I'm not talking about where they kind of come on, they realize and they step off. I'm talking about where they come onto the track and they kind of do the yield, but they're totally on the track. And I don't know what the word for that is, and I've seen people call it, but I don't know what penalty it falls under, and I don't know if there's like a 3-star cue for that, or something.
So, if I'm understanding you correct, so black blocker knocks white jammer out of bounds and then recycles all the way back, retains their superior position, is able to draw this cut, and then this white jammer, as they're recycling, come back onto the track and then get behind them. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah,
Yes.
that is still a cut.
You just call it as a cut.
Yeah.
Is there any extra cue you might give?
I would just explain it. If it seems confusing, like we saw you re-enter before you re-entered. You re-entered the track before fully seeding to that person, is what I
Okay.
would normally say to them.
Okay. No,
Yeah, it's still a
that
cut.
makes sense that it's still just a cut. Cool. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, that one comes up a lot. They need to fully seed and then re-enter. They can't re-enter while fully seeding. Anyone else? If not, then that's everything that I had. Thanks y'all for joining again. And like I said, next time we'll be talking about pack and engagement zone. So keep a lookout for anything related to that so that y'all have some questions for next time.